actually impact the share screen?
Nope.
Okay. Why don't we get started? Hi, I'm Jeff Bodenstab. This is Aaron Fitzgerald, and we are going to be presenting the 7 best marketing strategies to differentiate your business. We will not be taking questions during the seminar because we have a lot to cover, material to cover, but Aaron's going to be monitoring the chat area, and feel free to put questions in there. At the end, before the end of the hour, we'll have a little time to answer questions. And for those of you who want to stick around, you're most welcome to do that. And we'll follow up on any additional questions that we can cover after that. And I know one question everybody always asks is, are we going to make the slides available? And we absolutely will. Aaron will be getting that out sometime later this week. And Aaron, anything else you want to add?
I saw another question about the recording, and yes, we'll share the recording as well. Thank you for the question.
Cool. All right, so what are we going to do today? We're going to talk about, first of all, very quickly, what is a marketing strategy? And we'll explain a little bit about why it's different from a plan. What's the difference between a strategy and a plan? And then we'll talk about these ways to differentiate your business. And why should you do that? We'll talk about that as well. And then we'll get into all the different ways. We'll talk about different approaches. We'll give examples, lessons learned, and hopefully it'll be a very informative way to think about marketing, the marketing strategy for your business. So, first of all, marketing strategy. I'll start with this quote from a very famous marketer, Philip Kotler. He says, "There's only one winning strategy. It is to carefully define the target market and direct a superior offering to that target market." So I've outlined a basic concept of what a marketing strategy is. And that is, as he says, the target audience, your target customers, your offering, a superior offering, and that is generated by the differentiation. In other words, you're differentiated from other people and then therefore are able to deliver a superior offering to your audience. Now, why should you be interested in this, right? Besides the fact that a lot of marketers, myself included, I'm a career marketer, will tell you that it's core to success. We actually do have a little bit of data to back this up. One company did, a financial company that invests in businesses, did an analysis and found, at least in their own group of companies that they were looking at, that they found that companies that had a good differentiation strategy were able to hit a certain success metric about 35% of the time. Those that did not was like 6 to 8% of the time. So this is not a little, kind of thing that if you do have a good differentiation strategy, it'll get you a 10% improvement or 20% improvement. And at least in those cases, it was like a 5x increase in chances of success. So it is, in whether those numbers are exactly right is not important. The point is that this is a major determinator of success for a new business. And we call it a marketing strategy. By the way, when you talk to different people, you'll hear different terms like business model, value proposition. They're basically very similar sort of things, right? It's the core idea of what your business is all about. So just to also clarify, this is not the marketing plan. The marketing plan that you see here on the top part of this strategy is all the things that you actually do in terms of advertising and paid placements, social media conversations, etc. That's the actual execution of marketing. What we're talking about is the core strategy, the battle plan. I'm sorry, the core strategy that you use before coming up with the individual items that constitutes the plan, marketing plan of your business. So the let's talk about some of the different strategy. Let's get into our different differentiation strategies now. So the first and one of the most common ones is identifying an underserved target market. And I'm going to use as my example an interesting market, and that is online dating. And back in the days, for those of you who are old enough, you may remember that the way you met potential dates was in bars and through friends and at church and what have you. And then as the internet became popular, the idea came along that you could meet people online. And Match.com, one of the first ones, what came in was very successful, took a big chunk of, dominated the market, and was a very broad offering that a lot of different people could use. Now you might think, well, okay, so that market's been taken care of. Really isn't much need for more online dating sites because there's one that kind of handles, handles pretty much all different kinds of people who want to date. Well, this is where the idea of an underserved target market comes in, and I'll show you some examples by showing you how that market evolved, right? So after Match.com, along came eHarmony, and they basically came along with the marketing strategy of, hey, Match.com is fine for dating, but if you want to really find your soulmate, you should take our 60-minute online test to learn all about yourself and the people you want to meet and find your true soulmate. And they came up with a very different approach to the market and go after a different part of the market. Along came Tinder, who basically said, hey, forget this soulmate stuff, right? What about hookups, right? And they had a whole different take on the market. So whereas, say, Match.com, the idea of location was, well, I'm located in Providence, I want to meet other Providence. Tinder, the idea of location was, oh yeah, I'm at the bar down the street. So you can see it's a very different approach to the market. Then came along Grindr, similar sort of thing. Bumble, which the idea was they were reaching out to women who felt that kind of all what you've seen up here tend to be driven by the men. They wanted something that really, felt that they were underserved as a target market, and they wanted to be able to really manage and the process better themselves. And it just went on and on. J-Date for the Jewish community, Christian Mingle, the League, which was about people from the Ivy League meeting each other. There was one called Seeking Arrangement. And by the way, let me stop for a second and say that over time, some of the positioning of these businesses all throughout this presentation will have changed a little bit. I'm talking about the way they were usually when they came out originally, and you'll see that all throughout our discussion. So Seeking Arrangement, I'll just say that it was, there were sugar daddies and sugar babies. You can kind of figure out the rest yourself. And there was, this is one that really just doesn't leave anything up to innuendo. Ashley Madison, Life is Short, Have an Affair, right? Farmers Only, city folks just don't get it. Didn't see that, wouldn't have seen that one coming. But turns out there's an audience that felt underserved by these markets who really wanted to be either were on a farm or wanted to be on a farm. Dig was about dating site with people with dogs. So I'm sure one of the questions there they asked you in your profile is, what kind of dog you have. And what sort of relationship you have with your dog, that sort of thing. So, and it just goes on and on and on, right? You know, these sort of things. So what are the lessons learned here, right? And that is there's different target audiences have different needs, right? The person who wants to date, the person who wants a soulmate, the person who wants a hookup, you know, et cetera, they have different needs. So by understanding the different needs, you're able to create a business that addresses those needs successfully and become a standalone business by itself. Generally, and this is a topic we could talk about for an hour all by itself, but generally, the more different, the better. In other words, if you just have a slight difference, that's really hard to get in there and position against existing customers. So the more different you can be, the better. Another key lesson here is that differentiation is in the eye of the beholder, right? You've heard the term beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Differentiation is also. It's your audience decides whether there's a difference and not just a distinction. So you could think, oh, I'm going to do one just for redheads, right? Or something like that. Well, if the audience doesn't see that as an important difference that requires a different kind of place to go to, then that's not going to be successful. So you really need to think of this in the terms of your audience, not just what you think that it might be an interesting way to change the market. Now, one of the questions I often get is, well, Jeff, if I really focus on this narrow area, then, you know, that doesn't leave me a whole lot of opportunity because I'm just sort of getting in with this small group. Well, the technique for that is something called land and expand, right? And that is go in narrow, right? Find your audience and then expand it. And by the way, many of these ones I just gave you an example of actually do exactly that, right? They no longer focus very narrowly on their little niche. They've actually expanded once they get in. But the best way to get in is to go in very narrow. It's a little bit like I say, it's like popping a balloon. You know, you try to push with your hand, it probably is not going to work. You push with a little pin and you'll probably be able to pop it. So here's one other idea. If you're looking at a market that you want to go after, but you haven't had much luck thinking about how, there's an interesting technique called where you can create a market to identify potential target audiences. So the example of this, and it's done by a famous marketer called Seth Godin, is he gives the example of a piano teacher. And he says, well, piano teacher just sounds like a homogeneous market, really. There's not much you can do with that, right? Well, not necessarily, right? So he says, you know, you can think of this way. Well, there's very rigorous piano teaching, and then there's holistic piano teaching. Those are very different. And then there's jazz versus classical. And if you think of it that way, you actually can come up with 4 different types of piano teachers that address the needs of different audiences wanting to accomplish different goals. So for instance, somebody who's looking for a rigorous classical teaching and might want to be more of a concert pianist, or at least aspires to that, that could be one kind of piano teacher. If you have rigorous jazz teaching, then you could that would help you become a jazz musician. If it's just very holistic and, you know, a little more casual, and you get that jazz, hey, that's a perfect way to become sort of the life of the party. And I know of a friend or two that has done exactly that. And then if you do sort of holistic and classical, well, that's great if you just want to do it for personal enjoyment and family. And by the way, my wife fits exactly in this area. So that would be the kind of piano teacher she would be looking for. So Seth Godin has taken a holistic, homogeneous market and shown you one way that you can actually break that down into these sub-markets that you could go after. So the next one I'm going to talk about is taking advantage of technological and societal changes. And to do this, I'm going to give you an example. We're going to as they said in a cartoon once, we're gonna turn the Wayback Machine way back. We're gonna go to 1950, which was only a few years after World War II. And the people who were going over to Europe for let me back up a second. The U.S. Came out of World War II in much better shape than many other countries, and we had a lot of wealth, and we had a lot of wealthy people, and they wanted to go visit Europe. And if you want to create a sort of a visual image in your mind, think of the movie Titanic, right? Which actually takes place earlier than that. But basically, you're looking at these wealthy people who are getting on a ship and going over there. And so Fieldings had a travel guide that was really kind of focused on that group of people. And it was about, sort of the big, most famous places you would go to in London and Paris, the well-known stops there, et cetera. And they actually had a name for it. They called it the Grand Tour, right? So here you have somebody kind of like go back to what we talk about Match.com, got this great travel guide. Why would you need another travel guide? Well, at the point, maybe you really didn't. But there was a technological change that made a whole new group of people able to go to Europe. And if you think a little bit about it, right around 1960, early 60s, what happened? And that was jet air travel, right? So what was that? What used to be a situation where you'd take a week to go over on a fancy boat, very expensive, spend a couple weeks there since it's going to take you a long time, spend a week coming back, really kind of a 2-month thing. How many people have that kind of time and money? All of a sudden, you could leave on a Friday night, be there on a Saturday morning, and spend a week, maybe 2 at the most, and head home. And along came Fromers. And Fromers basically said, we're going after a very different audience. Remember, I said it's good to go after a very different audience whenever possible. And it was Europe on $25 a day. And they went after all those people who had to squeeze their vacation into a short amount of time, a short amount of money, and were looking for a guide that would help them. Then about 15, 20 years after that, another change, this time a societal change happened, and that is that students started having the money and the time between semesters, in gap years, that sort of thing, to be able to go to Europe. Harvard student agencies realized that and created something called Let's Go Europe. And what they did is, again, they catered it to their audience, right? Notice that right on the cover is this hitchhiker thumb, because these were kids that were hitchhiking around Europe, or they would get on a train and they would, and it would tell you how you could do overnight trains, right? So you wouldn't even have to buy a hotel. You could actually sleep on the train. Or if you did stay at if you did land in a city, it would tell you where the youth hostels were that were closest to the the train station. Where could you get the good music, the young people, the good pot, all that kind of stuff. So you can see it was targeting a very different market that now became available to societal change due to a change in society. And by the way, this has gone on. I'm not going to go through all this, but since this happened back in the 80s, there's been more changes. There's been guides for gay and lesbian travelers. Online guides have made a very narrow focus, like guides while traveling with your dog possible. Things that weren't possible back when you had to create a paper copy and distribute it through bookstores around the US. So you might think, okay, well, Jeff, all right, so that's an advantage. That's a technological societal change. You described, 4 or 5 of them that happened over a period of 75 years. But the fact is that, that doesn't seem like it gives you a lot of opportunities. But that's just one market. Changes are happening all the time. And I'm going to give you some more examples with some actual clients and with some real life situations. So this is an interesting situation. There's an actual SCORE client, and this woman was a wedding planner, very high-end wedding planner, and the COVID hit, and she was nobody was doing weddings anymore, right? How did she survive and come out of there actually very, very successfully? She came up with a thing called intimate wedding experiences, where the idea was you would go to, this is during the pandemic, you could actually go get a whole Airbnb. You would have a small group. You could see there's just a few people there of your closest friends and families that, and then you could do a live broadcast to a much larger audience. That turned out to be a very successful strategy, again, based on something that happened in the world. This one, the next one is something I thought was interesting. We attended a concert, candlelight concert. They have these all over the country, in fact, all over the world now. Somebody came up with a cool idea that listening to classical music becomes more attractive when you do a fun setting. Now you might think, okay, so what is the technological change that made this possible? You couldn't have done this 20 years ago. Why not? Well, those candles are not real candles, right? Those are flameless candles. Can you imagine the danger of doing what you're seeing here in the picture before flameless candles? Once the flameless candles came along, somebody was able to create these beautiful candlelight concerts with classical music in a setting like this. And these sort of changes are happening everywhere around us. Now, just going back a little, some of these have already come and are well known and probably, may or may not really have any new opportunities, but just to show you how it happens. So pets, the whole approach to pets has changed, and that opened up all sorts of new marketing opportunities. Used to be that the family dog sat, slept in a doghouse or outside. Now they sleep on people's beds. They have insurance for dogs. They have cardiologists for dogs. They have doggy daycare. It just goes on and on and on. Just dozens of different new business opportunities based on the general change that pets are now treated as family by. Oh, by the way, I think one of the most interesting ones that I heard recently was people are putting pets in their wills so that if the pet outlives them, there's money in there to take care of the pet. They designate somebody who will take care of it, and then money goes to that person to take care of it. So another one, solar energy. Solar energy is doubling about every 3 years. That is very, very fast growth. I read a story recently about, now you think of Oklahoma as an oil capital of the country. This guy started a business doing solar cell implementations on farms back about 5 or 6 years ago. Now has a 50, started with $50,000 and a couple of friends. Now he's got 50 people working for him doing solar energy implementations, taking advantage of that trend. Another one is aging population, and it's redefining retirement. People are healthier, more active. You get to be my age, you don't go into senior living home. You go out and you join an active senior community, and there's all sorts of services. My wife recently joined a gym that was specifically targeted. Oops, I shouldn't say this because it's sort of revealing my wife's age, but let's just say specifically targets people who aren't in their 20s anymore. Let's just leave it at that, right? Who have a different set of needs, and not just, oh yeah, we're going to treat you a little differently here at this gym. The whole gym, the whole people, the whole way they do it, the attitude, the friendliness, etc., all targeted at a slightly more senior audience. You all know about remote work. What is that doing? It's creating unused office space, converting offices to housing. That's creating new markets for all sorts of construction. Supply chains are changing. A lot of the goods that used to be made overseas are coming on shore due to the higher cost of overseas manufacturing. It's not as cheap to make it in places like China anymore. Tariffs have gone up. They may go up even more. And also national security concern. A lot of things that people were happy to make overseas now have to be made locally. So creating opportunities for people to create businesses to make things here in the States that used to be done overseas. At the same time, a lot of services are moving offshore, taxes, legal, etc. AI is now become, I remember it was sort of just a, kind of a test tube sort of thing. Now it's very public. There's 200 million users, active users using ChatGPT. I was just talking to a startup the other day. They were really raw. They just were three guys, and they were trying to get the business off the ground. They're using AI to go after doing a job for a specific kind of audience that needed help. I can't get into too much of the details, but somebody, if you're trying to do a task and it's a hard task to do, if AI can help you do that task and they can create a extra layer on top of the AI system that helps them do the task. And that's a very narrowly focused just on that one audience, that one industry, that one function within that industry to help somebody do it better. And kind of an odd one, but I want to point out these don't have to be big, global phenomena, right? When there was a new Pawtucket Central Falls train station, there was a need for probably some extra businesses in those areas that would support that. And I'm sure there's a coffee shop there now. I'd be shocked if there wasn't. There might be dry cleaners. People want to stop at places like that on the way to or from the train, probably coming on the way coming home. Maybe a place to pick up stuff for take home for dinner, right? So a very small change, at least by standards of a global kind of stuff we're talking about, it can be a very small change as well. So lessons learned here. Societal and technology changes, both big and small, create new market opportunities, both big and small, an opportunity to differentiate yourself from the competition. Earlier is generally better. I mean, it's a little risky getting in early, but Amazon, started in 1994. There barely was an internet in 1994. They got in really early. An interesting thing is that, so here's an example of somebody jumping in early, right? With electric cars coming along, there's one problem with electric cars, and that is they have a limited range, right? You can only go so far. So the idea was, well, if I'm going to make a long trip, I might want to stop for lunch at a place along the way. So those travel centers, they're in the middle, along highways, interstates. Wouldn't those be a great place to, fill up your car, fill up your electric tank and have lunch at the same time? Well, sure enough, Warren Buffett saw that back several years ago when electric cars were still not as many as there are now, and it made a big investment in that area because he could see early on that that was a real opportunity to take advantage of a change that was happening in the world. But you don't have to be a big company to make a change. You just have to take, I'm sorry, you don't have to be a big company to make the change. You just have to take advantage of the change. So, you don't have to be the one that's making solar panels possible, but you need to think of a way to take advantage of it. Maybe you're doing certain kinds of installation. Maybe you're doing batteries. That's the new big thing now is, okay, you got this solar panel, but you want to store some electricity. Maybe you become a specialist. Just be clear, I'm not recommending any of these businesses per se. I'm just giving you an idea of how you can take, how people are taking advantage of them. All right, moving on to the next one. And this one's called doing a job for your customers, right? And this is a kind of a fun one. And I will start off with some examples. And the first one is one of my favorites, a Rhode Island-based company. It's one I use all the time. So the job that I do a lot of times when we do a family trip with some of my siblings or with friends maybe, is I'm the guy who used to have a spreadsheet on his laptop and everybody would give him their receipts, and then on the way home or when I got home the next day, I would sit down and I would put it all on this spreadsheet and I would figure out what everybody owed so that everybody was paying of their fair share. And, just kind of avoided that awkward thing of, well, should I pick up the meal? Should somebody, are we going to split it, whatever? And that way everybody did. Well, along came a very cool app who saw that job and said, and by the way, many other ways to do it, to cut that problem, but said, I called Splitwise and said, here's an online app. You put it on your mobile phone, and what they'll do is people just put their expenses in, and it automatically calculates what everybody's contributed and what everybody owes. And one of the nice things about it is because you're getting a running total all throughout. Well, first of all, saves me a lot of work, saves other people a lot of work, having to give me receipts, maybe forgetting to give me a receipt, that sort of thing. But also this way, we know who's short. They kick in towards the end, and a lot of times nobody owes anybody at the end because we've used Splitwise to make sure that everybody's kind of kicking in. This is a great thing, and then people use it for a lot of different things, even like splitting the tab at meals and things like that. But a nice little business right here in Rhode Island. Another one is very famous, Shopify. So this was a bunch of people, I think a husband, wife, maybe one or two other people, and they wanted to sell their snowboarding equipment online. And they were like, wow, this is back about 15, 16 years ago. And they're like, man, we're going to have to do all this stuff to create an online website, right? We're going to have to code the site. We're going to have to have inventory set up. We're going to have to do the design. We're going to have a way to go to payment systems like credit cards. We're going to have to figure out, be able to get that information into accounting. It's like, this must be a problem a lot of people have. This is a job that people have. Let's create a way for people to actually do that without starting from scratch. Hugely successful, obviously, and now this is an enormous business. But again, started with a couple people very early on, understanding there was a job to be done that wasn't getting done. IKEA, the people, some of the marketers who like to talk about this, they say IKEA has a very specific job that they do for their customers. Normally you go to a furniture store, not IKEA, but say another store, and you and your partner, your spouse might look and say, okay, well, let's see, we like that couch, we want it in this color, this fabric, and you order it and they probably don't have it in stock, and then 3 months later it gets made and they ship it to you and you have a fun, nice new couch in your living room. And the job that IKEA does is that it fills up a dorm room in 24 hours, right? In other words, it is not intended to make furniture that you will have and love for decades to come. It is when you need to quickly fill a space, usually a small space, with cheap but reliable furniture, right? And that's where the story, the dorm room. So it's a very different job, right, than the job of normally going to a furniture store. Um, and then there's a famous story of Snickers. And because we're given the time, I'm not going to go into this. We have a commercial, though. I'm not going to show you the commercial, but I'll just describe it. Very, very famous. Do your job, doing a job for customer example. But you can click on this when you get the slides and actually watch a Snickers commercial where they do this. And what they did is they realized that most candy bars are like, let's say a Mars bar, for instance, is about it's like a dessert, right? It's creamy, it's rich, it's chocolatey, and people would normally have it in situations where they wanted something like a dessert. Snickers was actually very different. It was crunchy, it was full of nuts, it wasn't nearly as sweet, although it certainly had a certain amount of sweetness. But it had a very filling kind of feeling. And what they realized is the job that the Snickers bar did is it could be that between meal snack. So for instance, when you get to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, lunch is kind of worn off, your blood sugar is going down, but it's not quite ready for dinner. You could reach for a Snickers bar and you could get yourself happy until dinner. And in fact, they created a huge advertising campaign, including the Super Bowl commercial, which is linked to here, which was of people who are these mean, nasty, hangry people. Then they eat the Snickers bar and they're okay, right? And they're happy, and they're totally different. They transform into totally different people. By the way, to show you an example of how successful that was, they went from like the third largest candy in the world, or candy bar in the world, to the largest candy bar in the world over a period of a few years after they used that doing a job for your customer strategy to differentiate their product. Lessons learned. When somebody has a job to do and there isn't a product that obviously designed to get that job done, they engage in workarounds, right? Help them accomplish tasks and achieve their goals and objectives, resolve and avoid problems, and make their progress in their lives better. By the way, just to show how these things can overlap, let's real quickly go back to, I won't go back there, but to the dating sites, right? Some of those sites the audience had different jobs to do, right? Match.com audience wanted, the job they had was to find somebody to date. The eHarmony audience, their job that they wanted done was to find a life partner or a soulmate, right? The Tinder audience was looking for somebody to hook up to with. How do I find that? It's a different job. I'm sorry, not to, with. So the point is that they're also can be looked at that way. And there is a book called Jobs to Be Done. There's also a bunch of stuff on the web. So number 4, location, location, location. So you've probably heard, the old saying in real estate, what are the 3 most important things about real estate? Location, location, location. I've adopted that here for a marketing as well. This is a great way to differentiate. It is one of the most, I think, based on talking to a number of small businesses, overlooked ways to differentiate your business for small especially services-based businesses. So I'll give you 2 examples. I want to point out that these are not real examples. The names and type of businesses have been disguised a bit because we have very strict confidentiality rules at SCORE, where we help people out. So in this case, there were 3. This person had, we'll call it a hot yoga studio. It's not what it was, but it's sort of the same idea. It's sort of, you can think of it as in this example. And their two biggest competitors, one was based down in Warwick, the other was based over in the sort of the Riverside, Warren area. And they were based kind of up north of Pawtucket, up there near Cumberland. And they were complaining, I met with them and they said, oh, this is so hard because, the Providence market is so competitive, and these guys, they're bigger, they have better brands, the national brands. I'm a local, how am I going to compete with these guys, right? And basically we came up with a plan and said, well, don't compete with those guys, right? And in other words, don't focus on the Providence market. Look, nobody's going to want to travel 45 minutes to go to something like this each way. There's places like Attleboro and even Foxborough, Franklin, Cumberland, etc. Focus on those areas where you have the advantage of your location rather than the disadvantage of trying to compete with them on equal footing where they're a bigger, stronger competitor. Here's another example. We'll call this doggy daycare. Wasn't doggy daycare, it was kind of like that. And I'll show you how I did this. We actually took a map and we created these balloons here. The blue one was, quote, us. That was the company, the small business I was talking to. And the A, B, C, and D were their competitors. And they defined their market after I talked to them as households with incomes above $50,000. And there's a way I'm going to show you in a minute that you can actually find out how many of those people that with that kind of a profile are in a specific area. And you'll see here, that, the green, blue, the green, orange, and red each have much bigger amounts. We only had 1,300 homes in our area that had those. So that's a real disadvantage. And I could see where it was a problem. So we thought about it a little bit and then thought, well, how about businesses with more than 100 employees? And you can see here, it's just reversed. In our area, we had a lot more businesses. And this was before the pandemic, by the way. So the little different situation, people weren't working out of their home as much. They were going into businesses. And it's like, well, you could drop your dog off here and and then you could go to work. It has a few advantages, right? You can go visit your dog at lunchtime, or you could market your company not just to the owners, but to the business owners, right? You could say, hey, how would you like to, have something where you can offer through HR, maybe a discount on taking care of their dog when they come into the office, that sort of thing. So what we did is we took it seemed like a disadvantage and turned it around into an advantage for tackling that kind of situation. And by the way, the place you can get all this information is something called askri.org. And that is a Rhode Island organization sponsored. And by the way, if you're listening to this from outside of Rhode Island, I'm pretty sure other states have this similar one as well. And you might even be able to find it in fact, actually, I know you can find it. What you want to do is you go to askri.org, and then if you upper right corner, you'll see there's something called A to Z University. So that's where you're going. It's a resource in askri.org. And this is what it looks like. You can go in you can find a number of businesses, number of people. Remember I said we were looking for people with households with incomes more than 50,000, right? I've done searches for clients that, SCORE clients I work for. We found families with children, right? Or women who were married, right? a lot of a lot of ways you can cut this, a lot of different kinds of searches, and then you can find where the people are and how many there are in any given area. And this is a way more detailed resource than I can get into here, but you just get an idea. And oh, by the way, and down here at the bottom, you see 30 million business executives. So that's nationwide, right? So you're able to go in and do nationwide searches here, not just in Rhode Island. Okay, we're on to number 5. By the way, for those of you who stick with us the whole time, we actually have a number 8 that I'm going to throw in as a bonus as well. Become a low-cost producer. Now, you might think that's, yeah, really, how am I going to go up against these big companies? Well, let's go back to Let's Go Europe. Yeah, because usually big companies have more people, more money, better access to financing. How do I get the lower cost than somebody out there, big company? Well, interesting. What Let's Go Europe did is they realized, this was again Harvard Student Agencies, they had these students who had the summer off. So rather than hiring some expensive author who was going to take a year to go over to Europe, or multiple of them, and do all this research, they would hire these students for the summer. They would pay them next to nothing because they're already paying for a free vacation in Europe for them. All they had to do was to write up some notes and do some research, which was just basically all the fun stuff they wanted to do anyway. And so they were happy to do it for much lower cost than if you were to actually hire somebody to go out and do that job. Each one might go to one small town or small area, and one, in France, and one would go to a different place, etc. They'd send a whole army of these students over periodic, during the summer to update their guides. Nucor is famous now. They're now a big company, but back when they were started in the 1960s, U.S. companies like U.S. Steel were the biggest companies in the world. They were bigger than all the companies you might think of as biggest companies now. How were they able to go and compete? Rather than making steel from iron ore and building up from scratch, they made steel from scrap metal. And that was a lot cheaper. And now there's a whole story about how they could only attack certain markets and how they were able to go there. That's a whole, again, that's like a 2-hour discussion all by itself. But the point is, even though they weren't the big established company, they were able to be a low-cost producer. Southern New Hampshire University and several other universities have been able to create online universities at a fraction of the cost of what it costs to create a university from scratch, and offer very, very reasonably priced higher education to a whole new group of people who either couldn't afford or couldn't attend a graduate program otherwise. And just to show you that it can be a very LegalZoom also again has created very low cost legal advice that you can get online. CVS created Minute Clinic, so you wouldn't have to go to a hospital for all your needs. You could actually go and have stuff done at your local drugstore, that before you had to go to a doctor or a hospital, you could get in and out at a fraction of the cost. And just an example of somebody who, again, very small startup. This is actually my brother. He's based in San Diego, California. This was back, I'm going to say now 30 years ago, or no, not that long ago. Let's say 20 years ago. The only thing in the electronics industry back in those days for trade shows, for those of you who are not familiar, a trade show is like, think of a farmer's market, but for businesses, right? you would go and show off your wares and people would see it. You didn't necessarily do a lot of business there, but it was an opportunity to show your what you had to offer. And when the internet came along, and they were very expensive, it cost tens of thousands of dollars, maybe over $100,000 to have a booth and maybe ship equipment in and send people there, a big team of people to set it up, tear it down, et cetera, et cetera. Very expensive proposition to do these a lot of times. And my brother realized that, with the internet, a lot of the stuff that you do at a trade show, you can really do online. You don't really need to do all that stuff. But people still want to get together and trade information. He has a saying that the best way to do the last part of a search is with a human, right? So you've done all the electronic stuff, but then the best way to get that last bit in there is with a human. And he created a series of trade shows that people could go to, that the people could show their goods at for about 1/10 the cost, because they didn't have all that overhead that we just talked about, but still to get together in a sort of a convivial environment where they could meet with prospects. And by the way, because it was focused on a more social atmosphere and not just, looking at equipment and watching how it works and stuff like that, they had a big party at night, sort of think of like a frat party kind of thing with beer and everything, and turned it into a trade show, but with a very different approach. And that's been to this day, that's still their family business. So, lesson learned. I sometimes run into people say, oh, yeah, we could probably undercut that price, right? And, cost. So I would say if you decide to go this way, just make sure it's sustainable, right? A lot of times people get into, think that they can take this approach to differentiate. And in fact, the costs mount up. They really do not have the way to sustain a lower cost than other competitors out there. A good way to do that, by the way, is where you already have a raw material at little to no cost, right? So those students were sort of like that example, right? They were like the raw material at little to no cost. If you had an excavation business, maybe you could also be in selling doing landfill, because you're pulling up the fill as part of your initial business, and now you can get into that additional business at little to no cost. There's a very famous book called The Innovator's Dilemma that talks about this, by a gentleman named Clay Christensen, a professor at Harvard Business School, who I actually had the pleasure of being in one of his classes. Really, really a great story about a very successful strategy. All right, got to quickly move along with our last two, plus the bonus. This is called reframing a problem. Now, this is kind of tricky. You're gonna have to listen to this a little carefully. And the idea is that you basically, you tell somebody that solving a problem is different than what they think. The way to solve a problem is different than what they think it is. So the basic concept is, what if instead of this, what if instead it's that? So an example would be a company called TaylorMade, which makes golf clubs. They said, what if you, instead of trying to get the most loft, the most hang time on a golf ball, that's the way you think you get it longer. What if in fact it's about the spin? We can have a ball a ball and a club doesn't go as high, doesn't hang as much, but has a spin that will make it go faster and farther. So they asked people to rethink the way that they perceived a good golf club and a good golf ball was made. And of course, the way that you then do that is you say, okay, think about it differently. Oh, and now, by the way, we've got a solution to do it differently. It's called not leading with your product, but leading to your product, right? You get them to think about the problem different, which leads to a new way of doing it. Dentsply was a company that had tools for cleaning teeth, and they said, "What if the problem of your people who your employees who are having to take too much time off from work had nothing to do with HR issues, but actually had to do that they were getting their arms and their wrists were hurting from doing this, and created a whole new line of product that address that problem. But first, they had to convince them that it was a different problem than they actually thought, or a different cause that was causing the problem. Well, I was at a company called Tools Group. We did inventory management. People believed for decades that the way to get better inventory management was to have a perfect forecast. We said, well, you think it's about a perfect forecast, but what if the real way to figure out how to do better inventory management, have the right inventory, was to understand what the probabilistic possibility of change was in the forecast. It's not something obviously we're going to get into in this call, but basically got people to think very differently about the way they solve the problem. And then, oh, by the way, we've got a solution for that problem. So the key here is you have to be able to engage with. This is something that requires where you have a little more intimate connection with your audience, and then you challenge them to think differently. What if, why? And it helps to have a burning platform. That's an old saying. It means that, you're on the platform do things. This is there.
Jeff, you just froze a little bit, so we're not able to hear what you just said.
Okay, so I just said that the book to learn more about this is a Challenger sale that tell that somebody have to do something. Thanks, Aaron. All right, last one, exceed expectations. Famous quote from Walt Disney: whatever you do, do it well, do it so well. When people see you do it, they will want to go back and see you do it again, and they will bring others and show them how well you do what you do. What's really quote from the quote from back in the 1960s. There were no Universal Studios. There was no fancy, theme parks all over Florida and the world. He was comparing with, you know, built a world, right? And he said, we're going to do this so much better that people will just see how this is totally different. So the key here be the work of your audience. Two quick examples. I don't know that this is current anymore, but Tom Brady used to have something called TB12, and they used to build their business through referrals, right? And they did it very successfully, getting it off the ground with people said, oh, this is totally different than going to a gym. I don't, you, this is it's written, and they got people tell the word of mouth is a power. Other people will send
Um, Jeff, I don't think, oh, you're muted right now.
yeah. I think I dropped out.
Yep.
Do I need to reshare?
Yes, we don't see your shared screen anymore.
Okay, sorry about that. We're almost done, by the way. How is that?
That's good. Yep, we can see it.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a little bit of cutoff in the last couple slides, but I think you could just, yeah, try.
Yeah, sorry, you may have been on when I told people or the Cox people have been all over our neighborhood trying to get our internet working properly. So it's powerful, but you need to really have a great, not just a good job, but a great job. You need to over deliver. And you have to ask yourself, are you remarkable enough for people to talk about referrals? Number eight is differentiation. I want very clear, this is about differentiating your product. And that is if you can find a market where there's more demand than supply, examples might be nursing, other medical professionals, tradespeople. As long as there's more demand than supply, you do not need to differentiate.
We're not able to hear you, Jeff.
So
Oh, sorry, Jeff, you're muted, but I see that you're back. And you might have to swap displays again.
we'll just finish it up
Yep.
here. Why don't you go ahead and see if there are any questions that I can answer?
Yes. So I know that there was one question that was asked about, or a couple questions that were asked about one of the books you raised called Jobs to Be Done. There was a question about who the author of that book was.
I'm not 100% sure actually. When we send the